Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast, Credits and Incentives for Business Expansion. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams, Gabriel Sermeno, Director, and Ben Alderton, Senior Manager. Gabriel has worked in economic development consulting since 2011. He consults clients on statutory and discretionary credits and incentives related to economic development activities such as job creation and retention, capital investment, and employee training. Ben has worked in the tax credit industry since 2012. He advises clients on new markets tax credit financing, as well as other tax credit opportunities, including transferability, elective pay, and bonus credits brought on by the Inflation Reduction Act. And with that, we have our first polling question of the day. My business is planning an expansion. They're A, yes, at a current location, B, yes, at a new location, or C, no, or D, I'm just here to learn. So we'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds to answer this. And again, select your answer and hit the submit button for your polling question to be recorded today.
That's great, Chad. Thank you. Looks like the responses are coming in. And while we let that happen, I just want to do a quick kind of verbal agenda of what we're going to talk about today. The title of the presentation is Credits and Incentives Related to Business Expansion. So we're going to talk through some key considerations as you plan or consider planning your business expansion. Kind of go through some best practices in how to effectively plan a business expansion and the potential incentives and credits that might be associated with that expansion. And then Ben's going to get into a deep dive on a potential incentive that might be available depending on your business expansion. So looks like we still have a few folks who looking to respond. But that's our agenda for today. And once we get these responses back, we'll dive right into it. It looks like majority or a sizable amount of people are expanding. Some are not, and some are here for the CPE. So we're going to hopefully make this session worthwhile for everyone. but we will be focusing on folks considering expanding their business. And so with that, dive right into it and go over some key considerations when you're expanding your business. It's going to be important to look at each of these because they will likely weigh into how successful the expansion is and how quickly you kind of get ramped up. Obviously, workforce is going to be a key consideration. The cost of the labor, the availability of the labor, and depending on the nature of your business, whether that workforce has the expertise that you need to operate your business, are going to be key. I always have it first. Workforce is something that you're going to have to look at in a very meaningful way, looking at availability, expertise. You're going to look at unemployment rates in the area to see if there's an available labor pool. That might give you some insight. I think as you consider expanding, maybe you're relocating a team as part of that expansion. You're going to want to look at the quality of life at that location. Just make sure your team members are going to be happy where you're asking them to move, if that's part of the plan. And then, looking broader within that region, looking at, whether there's universities or colleges around that might be a clue to the nature of the workforce. Is it close by? Is that college known for, programs that align with your business activities? Those are types of things to look at when you're considering the workforce. Obviously, real estate is another key consideration, locating suitable space for your operations and assessing whether there's affordable spots that you can not only grow into, but then expand after you locate there. And is there room for additional continued growth in that real estate market? Tied to that is geography, right? As we look to expand our business, we're going to look at is our current region somewhere we can grow and expand and still kind of serve the markets we need to serve, or do we need to look at a different geography? Maybe we need to jump into a different market in a different part of the country. And so, what geographies, do we need to look at? With remote work being a new, relatively new kind of opportunity for folks to work, that could be an aspect that you look at and say, hey, we can have remote workers so we can stay in our geography, or we can have a new site in a different location of the country and have people remotely report there. So another consideration that kind of links the geography with the workforce. And then, are you close to your customers? Are you close to supply hubs, transportation hubs? That proximity to your important location criteria is going to be another thing to consider when looking at if you need to look at a new geography. Another key consideration is tax implications. What's the tax regime of the new location that you might be looking to move to or expand into? Assessing the state tax is going to be a big piece, but then don't forget to look at the local tax. The cities and counties can, levy gross receipts taxes, property taxes. Sales taxes can vary from county to county depending on, different add-ons that have been voted into the sales tax rate. So helpful to look at those tax implications, even at the city level, getting that kind of a granular look. And finally, incentives. That's why I'm here talking about this. It's most states, most jurisdictions have a toolbox of incentives to attract quality jobs. So they're going to be available to you if you're expanding into their region or location. So it's something that you definitely want to look at and make sure you're considering as you're planning your expansion. And so as we plan our expansion, as we're looking to make sure that we're moving into it, making a plan to effectively expand our operations, you want to make sure you have the right people at the table to make sure that all those considerations we just talked about, you have the right people to kind of help you figure out the different impacts of those different criteria. And so, real estate, obviously, I'll take a step back. in some companies, this might be all one person, right? Maybe the CEO has his or her hands in all of this and can effectively work on these site factors. But more than likely, you're going to have a team of at least a handful of people with specializations in each of these categories, and so you're going to want to engage your real estate team or your real estate person to help you to find a location that is going to be suitable for not just the immediate kind of expansion, but potentially long-term growth. With that location, you need to look at, do your due diligence on the site, make sure it's zoned appropriately, make sure if you have a big utility need that you're close enough, or that the facility is serviced by the right utilities. Those types of things that a real estate expert is going to help you look at. Human resources, that's going to be a lot of your workforce needs, making sure that the workforce is available, is properly trained, and making sure that there's no labor issues that you need to be aware of as you look for a new location for expansion. Environmental, depending on the nature of your operations, a new location or expanding an existing location can trigger, environmental reviews. In California, we have CEQA, and that process can be time consuming and lengthy. And so you're going to want to factor any type of environmental clearance that you might need into your time frame for when you're going to kind of start your expansion and start to execute your expansion. Construction, looking at those costs, coordination with incentive timing. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but a lot of these incentives that are tied to expansion typically have a but-for clause that you need to demonstrate that without this credit or incentive, you're not going to make a decision to locate or expand in that jurisdiction. And so you want to make sure that you're aligned with your construction team, that they're not breaking ground or executing a lease in a new location before you've engaged in an incentive discussion. Again, we talked about finance and tax on the previous slide. Important considerations, making sure that you're aware of what taxes will be levied in that new location or jurisdiction. So that's, you want to make sure, again, to make sure that you're engaging all the right people at the table. So when you're planning your location study, or planning your expansion, that you're able to do it in kind of an effective way. And so many times best practices are to engage in a location study and really kind of make sure you're doing your due diligence and looking out for all the different types of, and weighing all the different factors from workforce to real estate, to tax, to incentives in that process. So you can do a formal location study. You can engage a firm to help you with that, kind of go step by step. You can do it yourself. But typically this type of process, like anything, is best done when you give yourself some time. Typically, we look at 12 months, at least 9 months, but preferably 12 months, or maybe even more, to kind of go through each step and make sure you're weighing the different criteria that are important to your business expansion and weighing it against other locations. So, we walk through this, in the beginning, you're just defining what you need from a new location or what you need from your expansion. You're going to define the different criteria that you need. Maybe it's access to a port. Maybe it's access to a major transportation hub, or maybe you need to be by your main supplier. You need to be closer to your one of your suppliers and have that easy transaction. So you're going to determine those really preliminary location criteria and start to put together a list of locations that make sense to you dependent on that location criteria, those quotation criteria. Then, as you kind of work your way down this process, you're going to analyze that work. You're going to look at the different criteria and kind of refine them. What's most important? What's least important? What's critical? What's so that you can do without. And then you start to reach out to these states and ask for preliminary offers of incentives that help you make your decision on where you want to expand. And so when you get those back from the states, they're typically very quick to, if you provide a high level projection of the way, the number of jobs you're looking to create, the CapEx you're looking to spend, they will typically have a response for you in terms of an initial offer of incentives within a week or so. Based on that, you can start to, again, refine your list and look at, okay, we maybe sent out RFIs to maybe 4 or 5 different localities, and 3 of those make a lot of sense. And so we're going to move on and start to really hone in on our short list and eliminate some from the list that don't make sense or don't make as much sense as others. And so that's where you start to maybe do some in-person site visits, really start to have those incentive discussions, send formal RFPs that will help the state understand kind of exactly what your project is going to be, and that helps them kind of refine their incentive package. Then you move into negotiation, and this is where you're getting very close to making a decision. You're 1 to 3 months out. You start to really negotiate those incentive packages. You might want to consider providing an economic impact analysis or a study that's going to help really demonstrate the impact of your business expansion to that locality, and then start to conduct those final site visits, start to really kind of dig into the details of what you need and which sites make the most sense for you. And then, you make your decision. You tell the state, hey, we're coming to this location. We're going to bring our jobs and our capital investment, start to coordinate a groundbreaking maybe, or an announcement so that you can start to formalize the incentive package. And then I like to mention here that, we're not done with the incentive angle of this once you make your decision. Typically, any incentive awards will be performance-based and will require some reporting as you go on and do the hiring, make the capital investment. They're going to want to see that you've done it, and there will be some reporting. So definitely want to focus on that once you receive an incentive award, that you either bring a consultant to help you, or make sure you have a champion internally that's going to make sure that you comply with those incentive compliance requirements. I think the next slide is a polling question.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe. And we have our second polling question of the day. My business is considering A, potential expansion into a new market, B, relocating existing operations, C, consolidating operations and locations, or D, none of the above. I'm just here to learn. So if you just click on your answer and hit the submit button, we can record your polling question for today. Give you about 20 seconds here to answer polling question number 2. All right, we're getting to about 85%. Oops, sorry about that, Gabe.
No, I was just going to say, as we get the last couple of folks to respond, that what we just went through is, if a formal location decision, there's a process to it, dependent upon your facts and circumstances, you might do some of that, or kind of dive into it more deeply than not. That you may be saying to yourself, well, I've already made a decision. I'm going to expand where I am, or I have a location that I think suits me. Are incentives still available to me without going through this process? And the short answer is yes. And so I want to kind of move to I don't know, Chad, do we have there's the results. Some folks are consolidating. That's interesting. There's also incentives related to that type of activity. Relocation definitely triggers a incentive opportunity, and then expansion to a new market definitely can lead to an incentive opportunity. And so we'll get into that now. And so kind of that question kind of a lead into this next slide of, what are triggers for credits incentives? Maybe you're saying, I already have a site located. I know where I want to go. What types of opportunities are available to me? And I'd say, different activities will trigger incentive opportunities, whether you're increasing workforce, retaining workforce in the case of a consolidation, that can trigger an opportunity for credits and incentives. A new geography, that'll trigger incentive opportunities. CapEx investment, real estate transactions, that could trigger a incentive opportunity. So those are things to look out for as you're planning and looking down the road to see, if you start hearing that within your organization that you're going to be expanding, looking to a new market, maybe consolidating locations across different markets. Those are all going to be triggers for incentive opportunities. And so what types of incentives are available? We like to bundle them into two main types: statutory and discretionary. Statutory being, part of the statute as of right. So if you do something, if you hire somebody with a certain background, or you invest a certain amount of green energy investment, those will trigger incentives. And so those are on the books at the federal and state level. If you do something, if you hire someone or invest a certain amount in a certain activity, then you're going to be eligible for these credits. The difference between 1A and 1B is some of the states will have a pre-approval or pre-certification required, so that you have to kind of be ahead of it a little bit. Requires a little bit of planning on the business's part to make sure that they're letting the state know that they're going to be executing this expansion plan or hiring or investment, and that lets them know that this request for a credit is forthcoming, so they can kind of look at their budget. So that's statutory. Discretionary, what we mentioned before, and that what that but for is incentives that are available, but for, well, let me take that back. These aren't available, but for the fact that you need them to make your project work. So the state's not going to give these to you if you've already executed a lease in their jurisdiction, if you've already done some of the hiring. This is something where you need to make a compelling case that, without this credit, but for this credit, we're not going to do this project in your state. And so those can be very valuable because there is a negotiation, there's leverage on the business's part to tell the state, hey, without these incentives, we're not coming. And so those can be very lucrative. And so the statutory credits require a little less planning on the front end. Statutory 1A, without the pre-cert, you could go back and look what you've done and still claim those credits. But the other two, the statutory 1B and the discretionary, really do require a little bit of planning before you execute an expansion plan to make sure that you're not going to leave anything on the table. And so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of incentive opportunities that are out there. They run the range of cash grants to tax incentives to some training benefits that can also be financing. Ben's going to dive into an example in a few minutes on a financing program called the New Markets Tax Credits that are offered to help close funding gaps for certain projects. I'm not going to steal his thunder. That's just a little teaser. And then, you've probably heard there's a lot of talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a federal program. Those are tax credits related to green initiatives, renewable energy. So they run the gamut, and you can really get lucrative incentives from a process where you reach out to the states and you reach out and look up what's available before you start engaging in that activity. So again, I'll keep saying this. If you're expanding, if you're looking to grow your business, you want to give yourself as much time to research what's available to you for that expansion, for that job growth, for that capital investment, to make sure it's still available to you and you don't leave it on the table by maybe executing a lease or making an announcement that you're going to be expanding, because those things can reduce the leverage that you have when negotiating with the state or local jurisdiction. And so, yeah, I'm not going to read through all the different types of incentives under each, but hiring tax credits, they can be income tax credits, they can be payroll tax rebates. In some cases, there's refundable income tax credits. Each state and each jurisdiction has a toolkit based on its tax regime they're going to be able to offer you for your business expansion or relocation. I think the next slide is another polling question.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. We have our third polling question for today. My business is expanding and I have a financing gap. Either A, yes, B, no, or C, not applicable. So again, we'll give you about 20 seconds to 30 seconds here to answer this polling question.
So Chad, this is where I'll come in to start talking about opportunities that might actually, a specific opportunity as it relates to new market tax credits, which is designed to fill financing gaps that might exist in projects that are expanding or relocating. And so it's something that we wanted to dive into just a little bit in a little more detail, and we'll do that here in just a second.
Yeah, we're about 80, almost 85%. So we'll give you about 5 more seconds and we'll advance to the results. All right, here we go.
All right, so we've got some people that are looking to expand and actually have a financing gap. So new market tax credits might actually be a solution that might exist for your specific organization. So with that, we'll move on to an overview. So new markets tax credits is, people hear about a tax credit and they think, I'm going to apply for a tax credit. Well, in actuality, when it comes to a business expansion, if you're a business that's looking to expand or consolidate even, or just move to a new market, whatever that may be, that is actually a financing tool that you can utilize to help fill a financing gap that might exist. And it's typically some of the last dollars that are into a structure, but it can be very, very powerful and very, very beneficial to projects that qualify for the financing and are able to attract allocation. We'll kind of walk through each of these steps as we go through. As an overview, the program's been around since 2000. It's designed to spur investments in traditionally underserved low-income communities throughout the United States. And these communities can be in metro areas, and as well as a lot of emphasis in the last probably 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot more emphasis on rural communities as well. So it can be metro all the way to rural, and the economic impact that a business expansion provides can be a very compelling reason to attract new market tax credits if you're doing so in these low-income communities. What new market tax credits do, or what the financing does, is it creates a 39% tax credit to investors that make qualified investments in these communities. And the investors in these structures are typically your large financial institutions. So think US Bank, Chase, Wells Fargo, you name the large financial institution, they probably have an arm that invests in new market tax credits. And the program is administered by the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, which is a division of the Treasury. And there's $5 billion of allocation available annually through 2025. The program is not permanent within the code. It's been subject to reauthorization numerous times since 2000. So some years you get 1 year extension. We were lucky enough, the last extension, it was 5 whole years of extension. We keep hoping that there will be permanency, and you never know. Hopefully it'll come about one day. But it creates about $2 billion of credits that are available in the industry. And community development entities, or CDEs, competitively apply for an allocation amount. So the Treasury Department says we have $5 billion in new market tax credit authority or allocation to divvy out. And these community development entities apply for a piece of that allocation. And it's a very competitive process. And the CDEs basically go to the Treasury Department and they say, if you give us a piece of this $5 billion in authority, we're going to go invest in projects of these types. Some CDEs have a very specific focus. They'll only invest in healthcare. They're not going to look at a manufacturing project. Other CDEs have a focus only on manufacturing, or specifically they're looking for rural manufacturing. So they can each have their own different specific niche that they're trying to fill. And they say to the CDFI fund, give us an allocation. We're going to go do these great things with this bit of allocation that you give to us. In 2022, there was 197 CDEs that collectively asked for nearly $15 billion in allocation. So you can already see that it's a competitive process. You've got 3 times the demand than you have availability for amongst the CDEs, let alone at the project level. And then 102 of these CDEs were successful. They actually received a portion of that allocation, and it ranged from amounts from about 20 million to 65 million, with the majority in that 40 to 60 million dollar range. And so what happens is a CDE might receive an allocation of $40 million, and they're going to go look for projects that they can invest in that meets their mission that they said they were going to fulfill. And they're going to award each individual project a piece of their $40 million or whatever they were awarded. So what makes an eligible business, or what's a business that's attractive to new market tax credit financing? And I'm going to start kind of on the right-hand side and move back to the left, so kind of backwards here. But generally, we're talking about projects that have a soft minimum of about $5 million in project costs, and they have to be located in or serve a low-income community. And so there's an emphasis on, and there's also an emphasis on severely distressed census tracts. So a lot of this is location-based. If you are located in a census tract that is qualifying for new market purposes, and rural or non-metro, then that qualifies as what we call severely distressed. The second is by having a greater than 30% poverty rate in that census tract, or less than 60% median family income, or 1.5 times the unemployment rate of the national average. So if you meet one or of any of these 4 different qualifications, your project would probably qualify as severely distressed and would be eligible just based on location to potentially qualify. So then you have what sorts of uses and what sort of benefits you need to provide and what types of businesses can be financed. This isn't meant to be a very, very flexible financing tool. So you will see the traditional use is new or rehab construction or expansion. So a business is looking to expand, they're going to go buy a piece of land and build a building and put up a manufacturing plant or something along those lines. That's your typical situation. Or you could even have a not-for-profit business that's looking to expand and open up a new location, and they're going to build a new headquarters building or a new healthcare center or something along those lines. It's very, very flexible. It's a wide variety of things. And then the other use might be equipment installation. So if you're a manufacturer and you have room in your existing facility, but you're needing to add a line, that can be expensive depending on the equipment needs that you have. And so you can pay for or help finance some of that equipment installation. And in the right situation, it can actually be used for working capital, usually in conjunction with the first 2, but it can be utilized to fund new businesses or even working capital to help an expansion get off the ground. And then one of the big things to attract new market tax credit allocations, as I said, the CDEs are competitively applying for it. And then there's a lot of great projects across the country. And so it's a competitive process that you need to actually go to CDEs and say, you should finance my project because I'm going to do X, Y, and Z great things in this community. And one of the areas of emphasis is job creation. This has traditionally been a job creation benefit or a tool utilized to spur job creation. And so the more jobs you can create generally is going to be a way of attracting allocation. However, I'm working with some businesses that are looking to expand in very, very small rural communities where maybe 20 jobs is a very, very meaningful number in that rural community, as opposed to in a metro community where you might need to see 100 or 150 jobs in order for it to kind of have that same impact as you scale things up, just in terms of numbers. There's also an additional emphasis in the industry on the benefit to what are traditionally underserved communities. So BIPOC communities or entrepreneurs, there's definitely a diversity, equity, and inclusion component to a lot of CDE's missions. They want to see, how are you really going to provide benefits to the low-income community that you're locating your business in? And so that can come in the form of, are you going to do community outreach, job training? What are you going to provide in terms of salary? You're going to provide pay living wages. It includes benefits. All those things kind of factor into what it is that your community benefit that you can provide. And finally, there is a way, if you're not located in a low-income community, to qualify based on serving low-income persons or employing low-income persons. And this is a little more difficult, and it's a little more nuanced of a test that we won't necessarily get into, but it is possible if your business kind of fits that profile. An example of that might be someone that is doing job training for low-income persons, and that's they're employing low-income people, and that's the mission of that particular entity. It might be a way to qualify. And then as we talk about the different types of businesses, it can be almost anything. There's a few that we call prohibited businesses within the industry. It's not meant to finance a casino, for example, but the business can be for-profit, not-for-profit. Tribal enterprises are an area of focus for some CDEs. So it can really be a wide-ranging gamut in order of the type of business that can qualify. All right. So one of the things that I like to do is a little bit of a comparison between traditional financing and new market tax credit financing. So as I indicated, new market tax credit financing is meant to be very, very flexible and provide a lot of benefit to businesses that qualify. And so you'll see that the interest rate is typically below market. It can be as low as 1%. Even in today's higher interest rate environments, in the right situation, it can be as low as 1%. The interest only period is 7 years or 84 months, as opposed to traditional financing, which usually has a much shorter interest only period. Amortization can be longer than normal. Subordination of the debt instrument is quite common. So if you have underlying financing from a bank, it's usually not uncommon for the new market tax credit financing to be subordinate to that, and a very flexible loan to value ratio. One of the things that kind of is a con of new market tax credit financing is that it is expensive. Closing costs are higher. I'm going to show this diagram on the next page. You can see that it's kind of complicated. And so closing costs and financing fees definitely are higher than traditional financing. But this is offset by the last box there that's highlighted in green. There's actually a project benefit that can be forgiven at the end of the 7-year compliance period. And we'll talk about this on the next slide. But basically, an investor puts equity into the structure, and at the end of the compliance period, they step out of the structure, and any equity that's remaining there stays with the business, and so it actually can be forgiven at the end of that 7-year compliance period. And that is a very, very powerful tool. This is the slide that everybody rolls their eyes at when they look at new market tax credit financing, and they all think that it's very complicated, and it is complicated, but you can kind of break it down into some simple terms. You can kind of think of it as a little bit of a funnel if you want to. You start at the top, and then money funnels its way down to the project as you move from top to bottom. If you start at the very top middle, there's this investment fund entity. This is really just a cash pooling entity. It receives cash from two different sources. The first is a new market tax credit investor. So let's, as I said before, this is your major financial institution, Chase or US Bank. They come into a transaction, and this is a $10 million transaction. So the business is expanding. It's going to cost $10 million to do so. It's going to generate $3.9 million of credits. And in exchange for those credits over that 7-year compliance period, the investor puts in $3 million of equity today at closing. The other balance of the $10 million that is pooled in that investment fund comes from the leverage lender, which is usually an affiliate of the sponsor. So maybe you have traditional third-party financing, maybe you have cash on hand, maybe you've already spent some costs and you're going to get reimbursed for some of those costs. In some way, shape, or form, you as the sponsor need to bring $7 million of cash into this structure. And so the $7 million from the sponsor and then $3 million from the investors pooled together to make $10 million qualified equity investment, which happens in the center. It's pushed down to this CDE that in this hypothetical example has received $50 million of allocation from the fund, the CDFI fund, and has moved $10 million of its authority, not this is actual cash moving, it's just authority that moves to the sub-CDE entity there in the center. And that sub-CDE then in turn takes that $10 million and makes 2 loans to the project. A $7 million loan tied to the leverage loan and a $3 million loan tied to the investor equity. And so that $10 million of project costs flows down to the project, and the project utilizes those funds to complete construction, complete an equipment purchase and expansion, fund working capital, whatever the use of those funds are. And then as I said, at the end of the 7-year compliance period, the investor is actually going to step out of the structure. And that $3 million of equity that they put into that structure, they walk away from. They've received the benefit of their bargain in $3.9 million of tax credits over that 7-year compliance period. So they have already received everything that they've intended to receive from the structure, so they walk away. What you're left with is what we call the net benefit to the project. And that small box there shows the estimated net benefit. You've got $3 million of equity that came into the structure from the investor. You've got closing costs and CDE fees and expenses. As I said, these are expensive, and my diagram doesn't show these costs necessarily. But you do have those closing costs that whittle down your original $3 million of equity to about $1.9 million in this hypothetical example. And so at the end of the day, in order to build or to do a $10 million expansion at the end of the 7-year compliance period, really and truthfully, you're only going to have put in roughly $8 million of your own money into that expansion. And so you're left with that net benefit of about $1.9 million. And that is unlike any other traditional type of financing that you'll see out there. So this slide shows an example of being located in a low-income community. So the CDFI fund has a mapping tool, and you can literally plug in your address and determine that my address does or does not qualify. And so when you click on that census tract, there's a yellow box that's drawn around it, and it shows you the information as it relates to that particular census tract that your project is located in. And you can see that the census tract might actually be a different census tract if you cross the street. If you move up the screen there a little bit and move across the street or on that yellow line, you're in a different census tract. And sometimes it can honestly come down to being located on the left side of the street versus the right side of the street, just depending on the location and where the census tract lines are drawn. And so if you're planning a business expansion, if you're working with Gabe or someone to think about where to locate, one of the things that may tip one location from another is actually being located in a qualifying census tract as opposed to outside of a qualifying census tract. As I indicated as well, there's an emphasis on rural census tracts and as well as underserved states. And so rural is defined as non-metro in a non-metro area. And it's based on how close you are to a city, essentially. You can think you're very rural and you can be standing in what feels like very rural areas and unfortunately actually be considered metro. And conversely is also the case. So it just really is kind of dependent on how those lines are drawn. There's also an emphasis on underserved states or territories, and I've listed those here. And the way this is determined is really and truthfully based on the amount of new market tax credit investment that occurs in a particular state, as opposed to the low income population or the eligible population for the state. So you've got large states like California, you would think would not be underserved. There's actually a lot of new market projects that happen in California, but just based on population in and of itself, they are considered an underserved state. Colorado is an example of another one where I sit, and some other big ones like Texas is another underserved state. So sometimes in states like Texas, it's easy to tick off two boxes. You can be in a rural location and in an underserved state in the state of Texas. And so that can be an appealing thing to certain CDEs. So if you are in a rural location and in one of these states, new market tax credit financing might be even more appealing to CDEs than if you were located in those metro areas. And someone in the chat just asked a relevant question that related to opportunity zones, that they'd heard about them in the past, and are they still around? And opportunity zones do still exist. They very much are a financing tool and an opportunity that
Oh, looks like we might have lost Ben there. Gabe, if you maybe want to come in and oh, Ben, we got you back.
Am I back? Am I back?
You're
Hey,
back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Technical difficulties always happen. And so I was just going to say, this is my last slide as it relates to some of the ways that we help with our clients attract allocation. So we can explain the program. You need to determine your eligibility, and then assisting in our clients with attracting that allocation throughout the process and advising throughout that closing process as we go through. It is a complicated process, as we talked about. And with that, I think, Chad, we have our last polling question.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And we have our fourth polling question of the day. I think my business may qualify for new markets tax credit financing, and I'd like to learn more. A, yes, this applies to me. B, no, this does not apply to me. Or C, I'm just here to learn. So we'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds here to submit your answers.
So yeah, this is an opportunity if you think your business might qualify and it's something that you would like to learn some more information about. We'd certainly be happy to assist with providing you at least a little bit of information as to whether or not you preliminarily qualify. I do that all the time and determine ways that maybe to move forward. As I know people are answering this last polling question, Gabe, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and wonder. One of the things you hinted at and talked about was the ability you need to think about making a move in your expansion ahead of time, as far in advance as you possibly can. Can you talk about one of the things that we've talked about is the need to not have made an announcement or something along those lines, announcing too early. Can you expand on that a little bit as to kind of the timing and why that's so important?
Sure. And, I might put up this slide back again, Chad, if that's okay. Just some examples of incentive opportunities so people can look at that while I talk, because it really does provide a good insight into just what the variety of types of incentives that might be available. The timing is important, especially on the discretionary end, because you have to look at it in the true form of a negotiation. If you're a state and you have limited resources in your budget for business attraction and retention, you're going to be very careful about providing an incentive to a company that has already kind of made a decision where they're going to locate, right? So you need to kind of get in it ahead of that with your decision by making the initial outreach, upwards of 6 to 9, maybe ideally 12 months out before you actually either break ground, before you sign a lease, or make any announcement that signifies to the state that this project is happening. Again, they have a limited budget for these types of incentives. They can be valuable, but they're going to be very careful about who they select to receive these incentives. And if they get a sense that that you've already made a decision, then they're going to be less likely to give you very much. And just a real world example, dealing with a state, I called them on behalf of a client. They said, "Hey, I'm looking. My client's looking at expanding its existing location. What is available?" He started to go through his package of incentives that could be available. While he did that, the representative from the state, while he did that, he emailed the local jurisdiction, the building department there, to see if any permits had been pulled in the past couple of weeks for in that area that would have maybe aligned with the project of our size. So they're doing that during the initial outreach, so that they do their due diligence, they check, and if they get an idea that you have already made a decision or committed in some way, that can be a deal breaker in terms of the incentive. And that's why we had that stakeholder slide that kind of talks about all the different people that you need to bring to the table internally to make sure that HR is not getting ahead of themselves and putting out job listings for a location for which you don't yet, for which you haven't yet decided. Or maybe the media team has gone out and said, "Hey, we're expanding into X jurisdiction." If it's on the internet, it lives forever, right? Is the saying. And so, got to be careful to make sure that you control, or that there's a person in charge that kind of controls all the different aspects of the project that could potentially kind of dislodge or derail an incentive opportunity.
Gabe, one of the incentives you have up there, and I think people missed my explanation, my stab at the opportunity zone question because I had my audio cut out. But one of the things you have up there is tax privileged enterprise zones, which an opportunity zone, I assume, falls into that large bucket. Can you talk about opportunity zones and their availability still?
Yeah, I'm not the best person for opportunity zones, and so we can get back to that question via email when we get the right person here. But happy to tap dance around that and jump into other incentives that might be available.
Yeah.
So I think
I can say that opportunity zones do still exist. They are still a tool in the toolbox, so to speak, that does exist, and they are available if you're located in an opportunity zone. It's based on the 2015 census tract. So yeah.
I think there's another question.
Oh yeah.
Seems it's for you, Ben.
Yeah, this one clearly relates to new market tax credit financing, and the question was related to the subsidy E that makes 2 loans to the project, and they might be different terms as it relates to the third-party financing that would be used as the leverage structure in that financing. Definitely I'll bring up the slide here related to the structure to show that there might be some different terms that exist for that third-party financing that leverage loan. And that might exist, and it is something that happens. And typically what happens is you might have a bank that is underwriting the financial wherewithal of the sponsor, or maybe the sponsor has another location that they can offer as traditional collateral. Because one of the issues with third-party financing is they can't have a direct loan to the project unless they can't have direct collateral to the project unless they're making a direct loan to the project. And so one of the ways that third-party banks get comfortable is with the underwriting of the sponsor entity. So maybe you're expanding and you're expanding and you have a current location that currently has operating revenue that can support that loan. Maybe the third-party bank would just underwrite that, and the difference that exists would come from your other operations in that situation.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions in the Q&A. So with that, I'll kind of close this up here. Thank you, Gabe and Ben, for a great presentation today. If we didn't have time to answer your questions, we'll do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. And as a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet found in the slide deck and handouts window. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certification is available to download now in the CPE progress window. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. A copy of that CPE certificate will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have any difficulty downloading it now. And here's a link to an online survey where you can provide us feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this, as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you will join us again next time.